So hi, everyone. I'm Juan Cambiero, and I'm the COVID content coordinator at Metaculus. This is our first speaker event of this kind, and we are very excited to have Professor Thomas McAndrew of Lehigh University with us to present our work on soliciting and aggregating expert predictions on vaccine and therapeutic solutions to COVID-19. We hope you find this information to be very informative, as it is extremely timely. And we'd like for all of you to stay tuned for more events like this one that are in the works. So before Professor McAndrew presents, I'd like to just give a quick overview of the Metaculus platform and some of the work that we've been doing with regard to forecasting COVID-19. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with forecasting, but I'll quickly go over some of its key concepts for those of you who might be new to it. So forecasting is the tool, practice, process of predicting future events. It's probabilistic, meaning you handle uncertainty quantitatively, for instance, by expressing in this case that you are 50% sure that there will be a COVID vaccine approved between, say, mid-December and mid-April. And maybe you'll assign a 1 in 50 chance to no vaccine being approved before April 2023. So you'd express it like that instead of expressing a more vague prediction like a vaccine will probably be approved in 2021. It's Bayesian, meaning you update your beliefs as you encounter new evidence, and it's an acquired skill, meaning you get better with more practice. So what is Metaculus? What is our platform? So it is, we solicit and aggregate predictions on all sorts of questions, mostly relating to science and technology. And we have a community of thousands of users, many of whom are shared their insights with one another and collaborate on their prediction making. So the process of making predictions on our platform is different depending on what the question type is. So you think of the type of question you would like to have. You can create a question, anyone can create a question, which is then refined by moderators. You go back and forth on giving some background, making sure the question is very clear, giving some resolution criteria, and then you choose your question type. So you can have a binary yes/no question. We have numeric range questions and date range questions, as in this example here, which is going back to the original example on first slide of when a vaccine will be approved. So essentially for these date range questions, for instance, so you can really finely tune your predictions. So you can make your distribution narrower, or you can also make it wider. And you can add components to add complexity to your distribution by making it multimodal, for instance. So like really you can finely tailor your predictions to be the way you would like them to be and that you think best reflects reality. And of course, you accrue a track record based on your performance. So the more accurate you are in your prediction making, the lower your Breyer score will be. In this case, I'm displaying the track record of the Metaculus platform, specifically the Metaculus aggregate predictions that are the result of aggregation. And that aggregation process involves identifying which forecasters are likely to make accurate predictions based on past performance. We incentivize the forecasters to participate using a combination of reputational and sometimes monetary awards through prizes that are part of tournaments and the like. And we then aggregate all of the individual forecasters' predictions to produce the Metaculus prediction, which is a consensus prediction. And we repeat this process across many different questions across a variety of topics. Here we have a calibration plot that demonstrates our performance. So The horizontal axis tells you the probabilities assigned to each event occurring, and the vertical axis tells you how often those events actually happened. So essentially, when our predictions say that some event has a certain chance of happening, those events will happen at roughly that rate. So for instance, 2% of events were assigned a less than 5% chance of happening, etc. So at the start of the COVID pandemic earlier this year, we really comprehensively mobilized our resources to help in the COVID response in the way we can, which is by making impactful predictions on the trajectory of COVID. And to that end, we set up this domain, our pandemic domain, and we've supported research being done at various institutions on COVID through this domain. So I have some examples here. We collaborated with Professor McAndrew earlier on when he was at UMass to predict the early course of the pandemic in the US. We partnered with the group Epidemic Forecasting at the University of Oxford to assess the impact of lockdowns and the consequences of lifting those lockdowns. And we've collaborated with the Medical Center at Texas Tech University at El Paso to accurately predict their peak in hospitalizations and ICU bed usage. And of course, we have our partnership with Professor McAndrew on predicting when COVID vaccines and therapeutics will be available, which is information that we've shared with the US CDC. So as you can see, our publicly accessible work has helped inform decision-making really across the board. And we've had numerous tournaments and prizes that go along with those tournaments to encourage participation and reward accuracy. So for instance, one of our ongoing tournaments is the SELC tournament, which is on everything related to the approval, research, and distribution of COVID vaccines. So what's in it for those of you who may be interested in participating? So there are many benefits for potential users and ongoing users. You get to hone your forecasting skills. You get to immerse yourself in the latest research, either by doing your own research when you're trying to inform yourself on a relevant question that you're predicting on, or by seeing the research that other people share when they, because users often share like findings that they have found or research that they found especially useful to making predictions on a question. You get to help guide decision making. So as I mentioned in the last slide, for COVID specifically, we've helped inform medical centers, the CDC, various academic groups. You get to be part of that. And you get to be part of a community of forecasters. So here I just have a little screenshot of our Metaculus Discord. And our forecasters have really created a very nice community in which no one feels like they can, where people feel very comfortable in making predictions and asking questions and seeking resources and tips from others. It's really a nice community. And so finally, I would like to introduce Professor McAndrew, our guest today. He is an applied mathematician and biostatistician. He received his PhD in mathematical sciences from the University of Vermont, his master's in biostatistics from Georgetown University, and his bachelor's in biomathematics from the University of Scranton. And he is currently an assistant professor at Lehigh University's College of Health, where he's leading various projects that he will surely discuss to support public health decision-making for COVID. So I'd like to turn it over to Professor McAndrew, and if you have any questions, you can post them in the Q&A, and I will pick out relevant questions depending on time constraints that we have toward the end for Professor McAndrew to answer. So I'd like to turn it over to Professor McAndrew. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Juan. That was that's pretty cool.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. Well, yep. Someone already introduced me, but I guess it's my job to introduce myself. I'm Dr McAndrew, assistant professor at Lehigh University in the College of Health and PI of the Computational Uncertainty Lab. And today I want to talk a little bit about my work that I've done with Metaculus, and the title that I chose that I think is maybe, like Juan said, timely, is Consensus Probabilistic Predictions of the Timing, Efficacy, and Safety of a SARS-CoV-2 Vaccine by Experts and Trained Forecasters. Okay, let's dig in. First, a brief timeline of the project and the goals. As many of you probably know, the pandemic began in late December 2019 in Wuhan, China. Cases were reported in the US in February, and that includes the first US death on the West Coast in late February. Not until May 15th were remarks beginning to be made by the White House on vaccine development. Our first summary project from this work was presented June 30th to members of the CDC and available to the public. After that, July 27th, Moderna launches a phase 3 trial under this Operation Warp Speed. Shortly after, Oxford and AstraZeneca have a phase 3 trial, and their design for that is posted to clinicaltrials.gov on August 18th, which I think is quite fast. And all this work is going on, having to do with vaccine development. The White House is remarking on it. The virus is spreading. And Pew Research on September 13th polls Americans in the US. And they find the following, they kind of estimate this statistic, that 49% of Americans would not volunteer to be inoculated by the first SARS-CoV-2 vaccine. So about half people would not choose to be vaccinated. Just to remind you, to date, and this figure here on the bottom is on the horizontal axis, month and year. On the vertical axis in the top pane is cumulative number of confirmed cases. In the bottom pane, cumulative number of deaths. And to date, there's roughly 8.3 million confirmed cases in the US and over 200,000 deaths. This is from the COVID tracking project. The virus is still spreading, the virus is growing. People are developing vaccines. But most people wouldn't volunteer to be inoculated. Why? Here's that article that kind of presents Pew Research's work, and it's titled, "The US public now divided over whether to get COVID-19 vaccine. There's concerns about the safety and effectiveness of possible vaccines and the pace of the approval process." So there's this idea that because it feels like it's being rushed to build a vaccine, that people are skeptical. Another research article that came out recently, thank you Gaia for recommending this to me. It was a great read if anybody's interested in reading it, from The Economist. And the title was, "Should COVID be left to spread among the young and healthy?" And it's this debate about the Great Barrington Plan, which is to allow people who are young and healthy to do whatever they want, not be locked down and get infected in hopes that they become immune to the disease, SARS-CoV-2, and achieve herd immunity. As you may imagine, there's another side of this coin called the John Snow plan or proposition, which says to not do that. That's a bad idea. So not only is the US is kind of divided over whether or not to be inoculated by a vaccine because they don't really trust the rushed process and whether or not a new vaccine will be effective and safe. There's also confusion among scientists, right? And there's a division among them too. And that breaks down trust also. And it makes it hard to communicate risk and information to people. And it makes it difficult for public health officials to strategize. So the goal for this work is to kind of address these problems. And really is to support public health strategies and decision-making with probabilistic predictions from subject matter experts and trained generalist forecasters from Metaculus. Past work has shown not only in forecasting in infectious disease, but risk communication in general, that probabilistic forecasts better communicate risk than point forecasts. Not only that, this work in particular supports the idea that subject matter experts provide access to information computational models may not have. Right? Computational models rely on structured, formatted data, and subject matter experts don't need that type of formatting. The third kind of piece of this goal is trained forecasters, I hypothesize, can complement experts who may have an extensive background studying vaccines, but not necessarily a background in forecasting. Who are our forecasters? Well, we have a definition for an expert. We define an expert as someone in molecular and cellular biology, microbiology. They could be trained in virology, biochemistry, infectious disease. And we ask that those participants have several years of experience in vaccine, antiviral, or biological research related to infectious disease agents. So they have to be involved with infectious disease agents. And specifically kept up to date with vaccine and antiviral research, specifically focused on the COVID-19 pandemic. Right? So there's these three kind of conditions that experts need to meet for us to define them as an expert. One is that they have to have training in biology, chemistry, or infectious disease. The other one is that they should have several years experience in vaccine research, or at least in infectious disease research. And the third one is that they need to be they have had to have had kept up to date with vaccine research related to the novel coronavirus. That means we're excluding people who are an infectious disease expert, they have several years experience, but they haven't kept up to date with COVID-19 vaccine research. We solicited participation from all sorts of people in three different areas, I think, for the most part. One is looking at publications of prominent researchers in the field of infectious disease and emailing them and asking if they'd like to participate. A second way we've kind of accessed people is through infectious disease networks. I'm very fortunate that my research area is, I guess it's growing, but at the time it was very niche and small, and we know a lot of one another. And then third, one specific kind of network to tap is the MIDAS network, which is a network of modelers of infectious disease agents. So this is how we define an expert. How do we define a trained forecaster? Well, trained forecasters were defined as the top 1% out of a total pool of approximately 13,000 forecasters, according to this Metaculus point system that they have, with track records spanning several years. So there was three conditions to define an expert. There's two conditions to define a trained forecaster. In this case, they have had to have made accurate predictions, and they have to have a track record of these predictions. You cannot be someone who's been very accurate, but only made forecasts maybe for the past week. You've had to have several years of making forecasts and a good track record. Those solicitations were sent to the top 1% of people, and we asked, hey, do you want to join and volunteer in this work? Well, let's see who we got. So our pool of forecasters, we conducted 4 different surveys. And in those 4 surveys, the first survey, there was 17 forecasters, second survey, 15, the third, 11, and the final one, 12. You can see here the distribution of experts and trained forecasters is fairly even throughout those 4 surveys. And there's a consistent number of forecasters over those 4 months, somewhere between 12 and 17 people. 17 people, that's not that, that's not that many, right? How much work could they possibly be doing? Let's look at the number of predictions they made. For these 4 surveys, the first survey, they made 161 predictions or revisions to their predictions. Second survey, 148. The third one, 153. And the final one, 75. So even though there's maybe 12 to 17 experts and trained generalist forecasters, they're making a huge number of forecasts and revisions to their forecasts over time. So they made frequent revisions to their predicted distributions. The number of revisions or the number of predictions over time was fairly consistent, except for this last survey, which did have the smallest number. And I think this is most surprising to me, is that there was an even distribution of the number of predictions made by experts and trained forecasters, except for this last survey. So experts did have this tendency to kind of go back and revise their work, at least in the first 2 surveys. In the last 2, they tailed off a little bit. But I was impressed by that. So experts and trained forecasters have made a lot of predictions. What about comments? What about textual information to rationalize their predictions? Well, not as good. Over these 4 surveys, there was 26. That was the most we had in one session, in one survey, 26 comments. After that, it was 11, 14, and only 5 for the last survey. Overall, trained forecasters tend to make more comments and give a better rationale for their predictions than experts. You can see here in the first survey, they did pretty well. Experts made 12 comments, trained forecasters 14. But after that, the comparison between experts and trained forecasters is 3 to 8, 2 to 12. So experts aren't necessarily making comments or adding contextual information about why they're predicting something a certain way. Trained forecasters are. This is just a brief look at how many forecasters we had, how many predictions they made, and how many comments they made. But what did we ask them? Well, over those 4 surveys, we asked 26 questions, and they were broadly focused on efficacy, timing, and safety. Let's take a look at these forecasts. And first, we'll focus on efficacy. So here you see 3 panels, one on the left, the middle, and the right. On the left is a single question about a very specific trial. In the middle, it's a comparison across different platforms or ways to deliver a vaccine. And the very right, it's a comparison of the process for being authorized by the FDA or a governing body to produce a vaccine and deliver it to the masses. Let's look at the first one on the left, on the very far left. The question we asked: what will be the efficacy of the Oxford AstraZeneca ChAdOx1 COVID-19 vaccine candidate? So what's the efficacy of this candidate vaccine according to the results of their phase 2/3 testing? On the horizontal axis is efficacy in percentage points from 0 to 100. On the vertical axis is the probability density function. What do we see? We see a median efficacy, experts and trained forecasters predict, is 55%, but they do have some broad uncertainty around that. The 80% confidence interval is anywhere from 7.5 to 84% effective, which is a very large range. So, and 55%, the seasonal flu vaccine is roughly 50% effective. And so you see, it looks like experts and trained generalist forecasters are predicting efficacy similar to something like the flu shot, but they are very uncertain. There's this broad uncertainty between anywhere from 8 to 80% effective for this specific trial. So this is just one example. Experts and trained forecasters also made predictions across platforms. We asked them the efficacy of a vaccine for 3 different platforms. One was a protein subunit platform, an inactivated virus platform, and a non-replicating virus platform. On the horizontal axis in this middle pane is efficacy. On the vertical are the 3 different platforms from top to bottom: protein subunit, inactivated virus, and non-replicating. The left side of the bar is the 10th percentile. The right side of the bar is the 90th percentile. The dot in the middle is the median or 50th percentile. And so you have a 50th percentile and roughly 80% confidence interval for the efficacy of a vaccine being delivered with one of these platforms. What do you see? Well, there is some variation in the median estimate of efficacy for some of these platforms. The 80% confidence interval is roughly the same. So experts and trained forecasters predict that the platform may not necessarily matter in terms of efficacy. Okay, this final panel on the right is a comparison by process. We asked again the efficacy of a vaccine that went through the standard process that the FDA has, or a sort of rushed emergency use authorization. On the horizontal axis is efficacy, again in percentage points from 0 to 100. On the vertical axis is the probability density function. And you see something I think you would probably expect. You know, experts and trained forecasters, their consensus prediction is that vaccines that go through the standard process by the FDA would likely be more efficacious than those that went through an emergency use authorization. I think what's interesting about this is that the efficacy isn't, you know, much lower for an emergency use authorization. It's, you know, experts predict that it wouldn't be that much worse. And I think that these three predictions give you a sense of what experts and trained forecasters can do. So the headline, you know, for this kind of efficacy slide is that first, the efficacy of a SARS-CoV-2 vaccine, you know, experts and trained forecasters can make reasonable predictions. And they can make predictions focused on a specific trial, so we can ask them very specific, for a very specific prediction about a certain trial, one trial. We can ask them to compare different platforms and compare different federal authorizations and how that may impact efficacy. Something else that I think is unique to human judgment and prediction by humans is commentary. And so here's just an example of two kind of blurbs from forecasters. One said the bigger question here is how long will the effectiveness last? So not just that a vaccine is efficacious, but how long will it be efficacious for if you're inoculated? Another forecaster said, I think very low efficacies are possible here. So this is detailed information that you're getting from humans that computational models may not necessarily give you. I can't imagine a statistical model giving you sort of textual information like this. That's efficacy. Let's look at timing. So for timing, we have a similar format. On the very left panel is time until first approval of a vaccine. In the middle is time until a survival benefit is seen in a trial. On the very far right is time until 100 million doses are manufactured and available to the public. Let's look at the far left first. There's 4 different panels. In the first 2 panels, we asked the same question in 2 different surveys, and that question was, when will a SARS-CoV-2 vaccine be approved? In the 3rd and 4th panel, we asked this question in the same survey in September. When will a SARS-CoV-2 vaccine be approved through a normal FDA authorization process? And when will a SARS-CoV-2 vaccine be approved through an emergency use authorization? So we're making a kind of division here between a normal process and a rushed process. Well, in June 6, 2020, experts predicted roughly a median of March 2021 when a SARS-CoV-2 vaccine will be approved. This is a long time ago. I know it doesn't feel like that, but it is. In the next month, they update their prediction to a median of April 2021, although for both of these forecasts, the mode or the most likely timing is much earlier than 2021. Now we're in September, 2 months later, and we ask when a SARS-CoV-2 vaccine will be approved through a normal authorization versus an emergency use authorization. And what do we see? Well, the emergency use authorization, experts predict, will be approved in February 2021, much sooner. And that's the median. The mode is even earlier than that. Look, at the end of the year. Contrast that with a normal approval process, not until maybe June, July 2021. This type of information, I think, is important for the public, but I think it can also be important for planning by public health officials. In the middle panel, we have time until a survival benefit seen in a trial. Again, there's 4 different panels. On the horizontal axis is the month year, so the timing, probability for times. On the vertical are the 4 survey closing dates, and referring to the questions that we asked. The first question in the top panel was when a survival benefit will be seen in a clinical trial. The second one is the survival benefit seen in a clinical trial where a vaccine had an antiviral platform. The next one, a monoclonal antibody platform. And the last one, an orally administered vaccine. June 2020, experts predict not until March 2021 will a survival benefit be seen in a trial, possibly earlier though, because most of the probability is earlier than that. In terms of a monoclonal antibody or antiviral platform, experts don't think there'll be too much of a difference, although the monoclonal antibody might be approved, or you might see a survival benefit earlier than the antiviral. The orally administered vaccine, huge uncertainty, very flat probability distribution. The median is January 2022, but really a distribution like this kind of tells me experts and forecasters, we just don't know. They don't know when an orally administered SARS-CoV-2 vaccine would show a survival benefit in a clinical trial, and that's important information. The last panel, time until 100 million doses are manufactured and available to the public. So 2 panels again. The first question, number of weeks to manufacture 100 million doses of a vaccine after approval by a DNA RNA platform. So it has to have a DNA RNA platform, has to be approved. How many weeks after that approval would 100 million doses be produced? Same question in the second panel, except a non-replicating viral platform. So 2 different platforms. How long would it take from approval to get to 100 million doses? I think the most interesting thing here is that experts and trained forecasters predict that a DNA RNA platform would take something like 18 weeks, compared to a non-replicating viral platform that would take 35 weeks, or quite a long time more. And that's important information, I think, not just for the public to know, but I think it's maybe more important for people who are developing vaccines, like pharmaceutical companies. They might maybe shift their focus to a DNA RNA platform because it would take a shorter period of time to produce 100 million doses. I think it's also important information for public health officials at the state and federal level for deciding on maybe where to fund or where to focus their attention. And I think the big headline here is that you can quantify, experts and trained forecasters can quantify when a SARS-CoV-2 vaccine will be approved, when a trial will show a survival benefit, and the time until 100 million doses are produced. And it's available for 2 different audiences, right? These predictions are for 2 different audiences. Time until first approval, time until survival benefit, I think is probably for the public. So when will a coronavirus vaccine come about? Right? My parents ask me that all the time. And I think time until 100 million doses might be more for vaccine developers and useful information for public health officials. So experts and trained forecasters can communicate to a broad and diverse audience. Not just one sort of, not just the public, not just public health officials. They can shift their attention and we can tailor these predictions towards different audiences. Again, some forecaster commentary. Someone said Moderna's vaccine is based on a replicating vector. And this other one, it was a long paragraph. I thought it really, the first couple words were something unique to human prediction. It started with documenting my thoughts. And they go on to kind of document their thoughts about the predictions they made and why they made them. And I think that's so crucial and important information to give a rationale about why you're making predictions you are. And it's something that computational models cannot do. Okay, last but not least, safety. Put the hard hat on. So here we have 3 different questions that we asked, trying to get at communicating safety of the spread of SARS-CoV-2 vaccines or the burden that they could cause. The first one we asked was infectivity of children compared to adults. So, can children propagate the disease faster or quicker than adults can? And then the other 2 questions that are related are the probability of seeing at least 10 serious adverse events, either through a normal authorization process or an emergency use authorization, so a sped up emergency use authorization. What do we see? Well, infectivity of children, 100% here would mean that children are as infected as adults. Something below 100% would mean that children are less infectious than adults. Something greater than 100% would mean that children are more infectious than adults. Experts and trained forecasters predict that roughly children will be comparable to adults in terms of infectiousness and spreading SARS-CoV-2 vaccine, or spreading the SARS-CoV-2 disease. For the SAE questions, these are a little bit odd looking. The majority of experts and trained forecasters put their probability on very high probabilities that we'll see at least 10 serious adverse events, whether or not it's through the normal authorization process or the emergency use authorization. And if you had a computational model give you just these forecasts with these like high probabilities, you might say, well, something's wrong. Why is this model doing this, right? We can look at the forecaster commentary and figure out immediately why. So one forecaster said, given that such a vaccine will be distributed widely, I would expect that even very rare and unexpected SAEs will occur more than 10 times. So this question seems very, very likely. It seems very likely to occur. Immediately you understand why this particular person, but probably why other forecasters are putting high probabilities on observing at least 10 serious adverse events, where if you had a statistical model, you might think that a vaccine is really dangerous. I think the headline here is that experts and trained forecasters can communicate short-term risks immediately, such as infectivity of children compared to adults. This question was around the time when there was some uncertainty around whether or not to let children back into schools. But experts and trained forecasters can also communicate longer-term risks, such as serious adverse events in a clinical trial. And again, it's a different audience. The first question about children compared to adults is probably for the public, where the 10 SAEs is relevant to pharmaceutical companies and public health officials. When we reported and communicated these results, everything is open source and available at GitHub. And here's the GitHub link, which you're absolutely welcome to explore. It has our description of the project, how we define an expert, link to all the summary reports, and our contact information. I think importantly, also the code to reproduce and explore these predictions. I am happy to put all the code up on GitHub and allow people to use that and explore the data. And so all the figures here are up on GitHub, and you're able to noodle around with the data as much as you want. I encourage it. More on the line of reporting and communication, the summary reports that we built and that we sent to members of the CDC and that we made available to the public have 4 parts. One is an introduction and predictions in context. So we took all the results that we saw, the predictions from experts and trained forecasters, and we put them in context of what's happening. The next part is a summary of the predictions. So each individual question that was asked, what did experts and trained forecasters predict? Which is a quick kind of top line summary. The next was a detailed report of the actual probabilistic consensus distribution, so a PDF, and we included a CDF. We included the median interquartile range and the questions below each of the figures. So someone looking at this report can see detailed information if they want. We go one more level of detail and give a line list of every question, the possible answers experts and trained forecasters could provide, and the resolution criteria or the criteria we would use to evaluate the truth. So this kind of report that we produce goes from maybe like most vague to very detailed. I'm just starting to wrap up now. Experts and top forecasters from Metaculus can provide probabilistic predictions of efficacy, timing, and safety of a vaccine to SARS-CoV-2. These predictions, I think, are fast and flexible. You don't have to train a computational model that may take quite a bit of time looking for data and do the actual training. And experts and trained forecasters can target several audiences, such as the public, public health officials, and companies developing vaccines. Not only this, human judgment, I think, can actually complement computational models. Unlike computational models, humans have access to unstructured data. They can rely on intuition and experience. And I think really important is they can present a rationale alongside their predictions. That's something computational models cannot necessarily do. In the future, as you may imagine or guess, we're going to combine computational models with predictions from experts and top forecasters with really three goals. One is to continue forecasting the pandemic. Second goal is to try and give probabilities over the importance or kind of optimal interventions to reduce the spread of SARS-CoV-2 and reduce the burden of COVID-19. And the third goal is to make these tools, the methods, algorithms, the data, open source and available to the public and to the scientific community to help them grow and understand how human judgment can be combined with computational models to build more accurate forecasts and better communicate risk. This work has been, I would say, generously awarded a grant from MITUS, the National Institutes of Health, and we're just starting it now, and it's a very exciting time, and I look forward to accomplishing these three goals. None of this work would be able to be completed without the help of some friends. I'd like to thank Dan Sluter, Tamay Besaroglu, and Juan Cambiro. Thank you all, you know, great collaborators, really nice people, very open, and quite smart if I do say so myself. And thanks to all of my students and lab members in the Computational Uncertainty Lab. Here again is the GitHub link. And yeah, any questions?
Thank you so much, Tom. That was a great talk. So I believe we've had a question where someone was seeking clarity on what exactly we mean by vaccine efficacy. So can you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah, so by vaccine efficacy, we mean a vaccine that's 100% effective. It means that if they come in contact with a person who has the virus, there's a 0% chance they'll contract it. Just the same if a vaccine was 0% effective, it means you can give them shots all day. The probability that a person infected transmits the disease to you is unchanged. And everywhere in between.
Great. We have a second question where someone is asking about the relative performance of the infectious disease experts and the generalist forecasters, and is asking if there was communication between them.
Isn't that a fun question to ask, to compare the experts to the trained forecasters, right? I love that question. Well, and I will mention that work that Metaculus and myself and another group, Good Judgment, did. We do have measurements of the truth and forecasts made by experts and generalist forecasters. Unfortunately, here, a vaccine hasn't been approved yet, and the efficacy hasn't really been resolved, and so it's difficult to compare experts to trained forecasters in this situation. I think that you can compare them in terms of some of the demographic information, number of predictions they're making, number of comments they're making, kind of interaction. And you do see that overall, trained forecasters, I think, in my opinion, are kind of interacting more through comments. They're making more revisions to their predictions than compared to experts. But yeah, I wish that I guess we'll be able to compare how well they did sometime in the future. And sorry, what was the second part? There was a second part of that question, Juan, that I missed.
Yeah, was there much communication between the infectious disease experts and the generalist forecasters?
Yeah, most of the comments were from, I think there's probably two ways that they could interact. One that we can record, which is through the comment board underneath each question, and one that we cannot, which is kind of email or Slack or some sort of like water cooler conversations. So we can't record those. But we can record the comments in the Metaculus platform, and I think by and large it was maybe mostly trained forecasters communicating with one another more than experts communicating with trained forecasters, but it's tough to say.
So while we wait for more questions to come in, if anyone has any, I have a few questions. So as you mentioned, obviously, most of the questions we've posted haven't been resolved yet. But if you were to make a prediction on what area of vaccine development and distribution, so for instance, efficacy and safety, which area do you think our experts will turn out to have been the most accurate, and why?
Boy, what a question. Yeah, you know, I have a feeling that that experts and trained forecasters might really nail the efficacy. I do. Why? I think just because there's trials report their efficacy, right? And I can't imagine a vaccine having drastically different effectiveness than any others that have been produced this rapidly, right? So I think if I had to put my money on the kind of what target they did best at, I would say efficacy. But failure is always an option. I've been wrong so many times.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I have a second question. So to your knowledge, to what extent has similar work been done in the past for different diseases?
Yeah. So, well, there's this project, right? There is a previous project that we worked on, which was asking modelers of infectious disease and also forecasters in an open platform, really more about the trajectory of the epidemic, right, or the pandemic through time. Before that, I think a great example of crowdsourcing and consensus prediction for infectious disease is from a group at Carnegie Mellon called the Delphi Group. And they've been running a kind of a crowdsourcing consensus human judgment platform for predicting influenza-like illness percentages in the US and for the 10 health and human reporting regions for quite a few years now. They have a long track record and a lot of participants. And that's like one of the best examples I can think of something like human judgment consensus prediction being really good.
So we have a question from Helen. She's asking about how we choose our questions. She says she understands why there are questions building track records that have an outcome that is eventually true or not true. And she makes a good point that it would be useful from a policy perspective to combine those with questions that are more along the lines of what is the chance of this intervention changing outcomes?
Yeah. Yeah. So we chose the questions. Why did we choose the questions? I guess the focus really, or the goal, was to kind of dissipate some confusion around vaccines. You know, there's a lot of, at least it feels like there's a lot of information going on. This is kind of an unprecedented time in terms of just the amount of information from different sources that I'm sure are biased, kind of telling people all sorts of different things, right? And at least one of my personal goals, and a large goal of risk communication, is to kind of dissipate confusion. So for me, it was really about, can you have a combined prediction from people that you might trust and who are trained in this field, deliver information that you say, here's 17 experts and this many trained generalist forecasters, and they're telling me that this is what the efficacy might be. This is when a vaccine may be produced in 100 million doses. It just feels like it might be kind of closer to the truth, like a sort of unbiased signal. I like Helen, I like your suggestion about interventions, including questions about interventions, and that's totally what we're going to be doing in just a few short weeks. Asking experts and trained forecasters about optimal interventions that they may take to reduce the spread of SARS-CoV-2 and the burden of COVID-19, deaths and morbidity, mortality in the US. So I like where you're headed.
Yeah, it was a great question.
Yeah.
We have another question from David. Um, do we have any idea how policymakers and CDC specifically responded to the forecasts? To what extent did it inform their decision making?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know to what extent it informed their decision making, but every time so at the end of every month, we compile this report, we send it to the CDC members there, and they always respond, right? They say that they've got it. I imagine it goes somewhere in the CDC, and I know for sure that it is looked at. But to what extent it's impacting intervention, it's difficult to record that, right? Unfortunately, it's difficult to record. I do know, some feedback that I got from the CDC was, and it's the biggest challenge of forecasting in general, is what do you do with this information? How do I use it? And I think it gets to kind of what Helen was talking about is maybe we should involve questions that ask about interventions as a way to help people like public health officials at the federal and state level decide what to do with these forecasts. I have a question. Am I allowed to ask a question?
Go ahead.
What was your favorite part of this project, Juan? Favorite part?
Even though the commenting was it was all over the place in terms of participation. I found the comments that experts and the generalist forecasters left to be extremely interesting, not just for the purpose of the project, but I mean, for myself, for my own decisions and planning out my future, what I'll be doing over the next year. I mean, and that goes for the predictions themselves as well. I mean, these are extremely timely and significant predictions. Yeah, I have to say, like, even personally, it's impacted my decision making quite a bit. So I imagine it's impacted the decision making of others as well.
Yeah, I agree that the comments are such a crucial piece of information that it's so clear that experts and people, right, like even trained forecasters, but people can provide that computational models can't. It's so informative, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's so informative.
What about you, Tom?
Favorite part? Favorite part. I think my favorite part is gaining a new collaborative institute to work with. I think, yeah, I guess I'm an academic, right? And I'm always looking for interesting academic projects and good collaborators. And I think that was the best part of this project, was finding a good collaborator. And also, I think, at least hoping that I made an impact. Someone very smart and much older than me said, you should do what's good. And I hope that we did that.
Yeah, for sure.
That was my favorite part, the doing good part and the getting the collaborator.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Well, while we wait for potential more questions, I'd just like to reemphasize how great of a collaborator you've been, Tom. I mean, so far it's really been a pleasure working with you, and we're super excited about this future work where we, going off of what Helen said, we can explore the impact of different interventions on the course of COVID. And I'm sure you've all seen in the news recently how in the US at least, but also in Western Europe, cases have been going up quite significantly as we head into the winter. So we're about to enter a new phase of this pandemic, and these questions on how impactful different interventions are is extremely timely. And these previous questions we've solicited predictions on the availability of vaccines is obviously timely to hopefully maybe even play a role in this this upcoming phase of the pandemic. So let's see. We have a few more questions from Ian that perhaps you can answer very quickly, Tom. You've compared the experts slash forecasters to computer models. To what extent will the experts and forecasters be using computer models to form their predictions? Is this an alternative or an intermediate step in the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, so we didn't ask that question. We didn't ask this question in this set of surveys, but we have asked before from experts in modeling of infectious disease, you know, what percentage of kind of computational models informed your prediction that you gave us? You know, we've asked that before, and I was stunned actually. I had expected before, you know, seeing the results that the majority of experts would have used their intuition and past experience. And it was really all across the board. Some experts have said 90% of my kind of prediction I'm giving you is my background and experience and intuition when I'm reading the news, like kind of access to unstructured data that I have. And just the same, you know, other experts said 90% of my prediction is from a model that I'm running, plus a little bit of my intuition, expertise, background, social media, news outlets. It's a great question, and it's something I want to explore more, how people are making predictions.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, I'm going to squeeze in one last question from David. Would you do anything differently to recruit experts and forecasters if we did another study like this?
Yeah, I think I think something important maybe is maybe more frequent contact and kind of updating experts and trained forecasters, doing a better job at sending out the reports, not just to people that need them like the CDC and the public, but really focusing on our experts and our trained forecasters, giving them the report back, giving them a little bit about, if we can, you know, accuracy about how they've been doing and where they can improve and how they can improve and what factors, what questions they did well in, which ones they didn't, if there's a trend. I'd like to give more feedback and have a little bit more communication with experts and trained forecasters, and not if, but when we do another one of these. That's something I really want to work on, because I think improving communication will result in more accurate forecasts, or at least more informative ones.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, and I agree with you. So on that note, I think we'll wrap up. I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Hopefully this was informative. Again, I can't think of anything more timely and more impactful than discussing the pandemic that is affecting all of our lives. And I'd like to thank Professor McAndrew for giving this talk, for sharing some of the insights of this project. I'd like to thank everyone else on the Metaculus team for helping to put this together. And to the attendees, stay tuned for future events that will be much like this one. And again, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Thanks.
Thanks again, everybody. Thanks for coming.